Hello, and welcome to Take This TV. It's the Television Book Club podcast where every week we watch an episode or two of our favorite shows and we talk about them with our friends, you guessed it, in the fandom. That's you. That's you, my friend. Hello. I'm Carmen and I'm joined, as always, by the wonderful Kimberly Woods. Hello.
What's up, hot potatoes?
We are watching Mr. and Mrs. Smith this season. What episode are we watching or talking about today?
Today we're talking about episode 6, and it's called Couples Therapy, Naked and Afraid. The Amazon blurb is, "Oh John, oh Jane, our pair have been oh so bad at sharing and caring. Time to call and help. John and Jane, get ready for couples therapy." What a gas.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a gas. I mean, there is a fire at the end of the episode, but as far as comedy goes in this episode,
it was
a little painful to watch.
Yes. What did you think about this episode, Kimberly?
It was rough to see our John and Jane going through this after caring about these characters so much. There was some comedy in trying to see them navigate how to talk about their work relationship with this therapist, because they basically tell her that they're coders, working as for a software engineer company, and so they're trying to explain their troubles, but in terms that are more coding related or traditional office speak. And a lot of times the therapist, who's played by the wonderful Sarah Paulson, is like, okay, I don't really understand why this is so stressful in your line of work, but,
She obviously doesn't know anything about the tech industry. But yes.
And it's interesting for the show, too, because a lot of times, we get the sense that time has passed in between each episode we see. So at this point, John and Jane have been on many missions that we haven't seen yet. And in this episode, we're getting glimpses and flashbacks of some of the trouble that they're having through some of these missions that they've been given. And the first one we see is when, they're on a roof and they're looking in the window and it's like a group of black guys. And Jane is wanting to take the lead on this. Carmen, how was she going to take the lead on this? What was her plan? Just to shoot from the beginning? What?
Yeah, there seems like some kind of gang and they're having a card game, and I don't know how she would plan to do that, but John's like, no, I think I got this one, and Jane's a little frustrated by that. So the mission that we see in the flashback kind of coincides with the things that they're telling their therapist, and John is telling the therapist that he feels like Jane is really controlling and always needs to be taking the lead. So we kind of bounce back and forth between the therapy session and then what's happening at this particular job. And so John makes his way inside. He's at the table playing cards, and he starts to bond with these people and speak their language. But Jane isn't particularly plussed about some of the topics of discussion because she feels like it's a little sexist and racist, things that they're saying.
Yeah. And she's also thinking it's taking too long because she sees he's actually having fun, bonding. And she's like, what is the holdup? I loved his line, though, where she was like, he tells the therapist, she was jealous I was bonding with black people. I had access in a way that she will never have. I was like, that is so funny.
It was pretty funny. And I think that, there are little moments throughout the course of the show where we see, the challenges of being in an interracial relationship and some of the things to navigate. And so I thought it was interesting that they brought this up because I think that, different cultures have different ways of interacting with one another, and it's easy for someone to feel like an outsider to their partner's culture. And so I thought that was a really fun way to do that.
Yeah, it was really fun. I also thought it was funny that the therapist does call him out at that moment when they're talking about Asian stereotypes and things. She's like, but you were bonding over racism. I get that, that happens in certain groups, but you were bonding over racism.
Yeah, probably don't do that in the future.
Yeah, it's not the best. Bonding's okay, but, over racism, not so much. So Jane, gets impatient during this mission that he's taking so long, that he's, having a little too much fun in her, from her stance. And she just starts shooting. She, shoots one of the guys at the card table.
Yeah, so we never really know what their mission is, but Jane just shoots one of the guys, or two of the guys, and then the third guy almost gets the jump on John, but thankfully he draws quicker and shoots the third guy. And then he snaps at Jane because he says he had it under control.
And she's like, she says she thinks, I saved you.
Mm-hmm.
To John.
She says she never saw him laugh like that, and like he's fake laughing, because she said he performs in front of other men. Which, like, a lot of the things that we see them say to the therapist about one another, very biting in this episode.
So brutal in this episode. He said something like, yeah, that's because I was laughing when something was actually funny.
Yeah, and so the therapist tries to like get them to, pull their punches a bit, and it's like let's try not to use harmful language, but they don't hold back.
Can we also talk about the coldness of Jane here for a moment too, because she just shoots these guys, and then she says, "I'm fucking starving."
Oh yeah.
I was like, oh my god, she just shot. And then it's nothing.
Jane has like no sympathy for these people that she's killing, and we see that like John's a little shaken up by what happened, but for Jane it's like, this is just another day at the office, let's go get some food.
Yeah. And then throughout these they have 3 sessions that we see with the therapist, and throughout a little bit in the last episode we got the sense that Hi was playing favorite to Jane a little bit, and in this episode we see the therapist kind of play a little bit of favoritism towards John, and we get to see Jane being a little bit jealous of that and being like, she's your favorite, Yeah,
she's like, she definitely favors you, and he's like, what? No, she doesn't. And he's like, yes, she does. I will say the therapist having the session at her house is a red flag.
Which she absolutely loves and continues to talk about, like, with weird things, saying like, this is the floor from my childhood home that I had brought here. And it's like, what? From your childhood home? So like, this isn't your childhood home obviously, but like somehow you got it in here now, and it's her cocoon, the space, this like,
the like character of the therapist was so funny, because like I grew up in a town with a lot of people like this, and it's like those people who like do a lot of peacocking and grandstanding about how cultured they are, and like she talks about her trip to the jungle and how she ran into this like exotic monkey and she stared it down, and she learned that like it wasn't about being in control, and she needed to be submissive and not look the monkey in the eye.
Yeah, so she wouldn't die.
Leaving, he's like, was that racist? Am I the monkey? Like, what?
Yeah.
What is she talking about?
I'm glad they talked about it, because in that moment too, I was like, "What is she trying to say? What is happening? What is the metaphor here?"
She's just like trying to show that she's so enlightened and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
hilarious.
Yeah, it was right before the session ended, so yeah.
She also always tells them that the Venmo sticker is right over the door.
She also has a piano there that was her grandfather's piano, or I don't know, passed down.
Yeah,
but she was like, John walks over to like start playing it, and she's like, don't touch it, it's not a playable piano, okay?
It's not for playing.
Yeah.
My great grandfather, he was the Nazis made him play it all the time, and he was like, oh my gosh, like you should have like a little sign or something.
Yeah. But it was really hard to watch throughout this episode, because their body language on each time we come back to them on the couch in this office, they're like farther and further apart.
Mm-hmm. We do see their relationship deteriorate.
Yeah. The second session, we get a cut to them on a mission where John's asthma comes into play. They're having to chase a guy. He misses the elevator because he can't keep up, and Jane's in the elevator with this guy that they're trying to catch. And John has to take the stairs and is huffing and puffing, and she's like on the little, talking to him with her earpiece, saying like, go up to the 15th, go up to the 17th, and then eventually it's the roof. And I guess the problem with that one was that she says some sort of catchphrase, or when she's like on the roof.
Die, motherfucker.
Yeah, and like pushes the guy off the roof. And then John is like huffing and puffing on the stairs and starts cracking up, laughing at it. And she didn't think it was funny. She's like, why are you laughing at that?
Yeah, because he's like, you said a catchphrase, and he's like, who was that for? Was that for him? Was it for me? Like, was it for you? And so he's cracking up laughing because Jane has this like 80s, 90s action hero moment where she says a catchphrase right before she kills the guy. And they of course like obfuscate it in like talking about coding for the therapist, but even the therapist starts laughing at the fact that Jane had a catchphrase, and Jane feels like really attacked in that moment.
And then we get the sense from John, his big gripe here is that he feels like Jane is constantly taking the lead, having to be in control. And he misses feeling like he trained, he's saying he trained her, like in the beginning when they first went on missions. He was in the lead, and now he's feeling like she's taking the lead now and feeling like he's holding her back.
Yeah, he said that she used to look up to him. And there's a brief moment where it's like, oh, they're connecting, where she's like, oh, I still look up to you. But then he mentions that he feels like she thinks he's holding her back. And we do remember from when the previous episode when Jane was messaging Hi, and Hi said that they think Jane's ready to move up. And so at the start of this episode, we hear them discussing, John knows that Hi offered for Jane to replace him. So I guess off screen, she must have talked to him about it.
Yeah, that was a relief. I was like, okay, good. She shared that. That's good.
Yes. And also in that chase sequence, like that flashback of that mission, Jane mentions that she feels like John doesn't communicate enough and that she's always communicating with John. And that's like we hear her calling out the floors to John as he's running up the stairs. But as we've seen in the past, when they were on the ski trip, John just like turned off his tracker and disappeared. So they do have like different styles, and John's not necessarily communicating how Jane would like.
No. Then on the third session, we get flashbacks to their mission where they're in the middle of the woods. They're in their Naked and Afraid episode, although they're not really naked. I guess he gets
they're
down
clothed
to his...
and angry.
Yeah. He's trying to fish and impress her or something with his survival skills. But their mission is they're supposed to be looking for somebody. They can't find the person that they're supposed to be targeting, and they seem to be lost in the woods. And John is having a moment where he wants her to need him, and he wants to impress her, but it's not really working.
Yes,
and she just gets more and more frustrated.
Yes, he's being very machismo in this particular mission.
Yeah, and we have one of the roughest conversations, I think, during this night here on that mission.
Brutal. It's was this
how
before?
Does it start?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to ask: is this before or after the therapist tells them that when things are getting too heated, say timeout?
I think this is in the third one.
Okay.
Because I don't think... Did they say timeout on this in the woods? I don't think so.
No, they didn't. Which I was just thinking
Yeah. I think in the end of the third session, she says that. But here, I think it starts over a book at first. Because she's saying, you lied about reading The Prophet. Which I guess she was talking about with the neighbor.
So
at some point,
I think it's episode 1 or maybe it's episode 2. John hears and sees Jane talking to the hot neighbor, and they're talking about the book The Prophet and how Jane loves it. And then when she comes back inside, John's like, "Oh, that's my favorite book," and they really bonded over that. And then as they started to bond more, that's when they started to actually be in a relationship, because it was all fake before that. And so Jane kind of confronts him about this because she mentioned something about the Prophet, and he just kind of tries to blow it off, but she can tell that he actually never read the book. And so she kind of catches him in this lie, and then he admits that he actually never read the book and just said that because he didn't like that she was flirting with the hot neighbor.
Yeah. And so then they're arguing a lot here after the book. And I wrote down in my notes, don't like the arguing, sad face.
Sad face indeed.
Sad face.
I mean, there's like, oh my gosh, there's no holding back. And, you know, I think that, like, it's definitely, their relationship has gotten to the point where it's actually really toxic. And if you've ever been in a toxic relationship before, then you, like, trigger warning for sure. Because, like, they are just, like, all the little, like, buttons that they know the other person has, all the things they know would be hurtful, they're just saying and throwing those daggers at each other.
She's poking fun of him about being a mama's boy. And then he like lashes out and says, well, you weren't there for your dad after your mom, and kind of calls her out for that. And basically calls her a robot that just mimics feelings, doesn't really actually feel.
Yeah. And he says that he thinks that she gets mad at other people for feeling stuff because she can't do it herself. And it's absolutely brutal.
It's so brutal.
So brutal.
And then she says, who is your emergency contact? You know, who did you put down for, to hi? And then he says, my mom. And then she says, you're mine.
Yeah, she tearfully says, you're mine. And so
like,
we kind of see that, like, she feels like she has to be in competition with his mom. And it's not good, not healthy, bad news bears all around.
Yeah, it's not, It doesn't leave me feeling very good about that. And also, that means they failed the mission. That's how they end their night arguing, and they also now have another, failure on the books, 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Which is horrible.
Since we're, like, on the topic of, like, this particular mission and, like, the sad faces, this episode had a lot of time skipping and, like, time jumping. And I think that, like, we sort of, over the last 6 episodes, we kind of see their relationship in, like, these little snippets. And I think we never really get to see, like, how they actually feel about each other. And we never really get to see the moments where things go poorly. Because, like, usually there's moments and signs where it's like, oh, things aren't looking too good. And it feels like a lot of that stuff happens really rapid fire in this episode. And we don't get to spend much time in each of those moments at all. So even though that argument in the campsite was really intense, like, it's kind of like watching people fight in public, or like, just watching a marriage fall apart in real time, or a train wreck. I think that was more of the feeling and less of, like, the heartbreak that I feel like they wanted it to be, or that it could have been, just because we never really got to spend much time being invested in wanting their relationship to work out.
Mm-hmm. Well, although I did feel invested, like, I feel like for me they did a good job of wanting me to root for these characters.
Yeah.
And wanting it to work out. I don't know.
I don't know. I think it's like, and also, like, the fact that they got their second fail is, like, they mention it, but we never see them, like, report to Hi. We never see Hi say, like, that's your second failure, only one left, or any of that kind of stuff. It all just kind of happens in dialogue. And that, to me, that makes it feel, like, inconsequential. And before, when they got their first failure, it was a really big deal. And even while they're out in the woods, Jane is really anxious about the fact that they might get another failure and what that can mean. But it all just feels really rushed. And, like, I feel like, personally, as fun as the therapist stuff is, I would have been more interested in, like, seeing that particular mission and, like, seeing, like, them get this second failure and what that means and how they emotionally react to that. Because after that argument, they go to bed, and we kind of cut back to the present where they're with the therapist.
We don't get their actual reaction, or if they feel nervous or scared about it after the fact.
Yeah, or what Hi does.
I agree that it feels a little inconsequential.
Yeah.
But it's really actually something that's high stakes, as we know, because the opening of the season, again, we have Mr. and Mrs. Smith being hunted down by, other Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So it's like, okay, hello.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with that, Carmen. I think it's also funny, again, with the therapist saying, there's nobody holding a gun to your head to stay in this marriage. But we know that that's not the case. We know that it's very high risk to not stay in this relationship. So
yeah, like John 2 and Jane 2 taught us previously that you can't just break up. So because the therapist suggests you guys are choosing to be in this relationship, but really we know that they aren't. So it kind of sets the tone of they're kind of being held hostage and they're being forced to stay together. But the therapist suggests that potentially they could do separate work or separate projects. And so they're like, okay, we'll ask Hi. Well, they don't say that to the therapist, but it's implied that they'll see if they can get separate missions.
Although they do almost slip, which is funny. I think he says, we'll ask Hi. And then and then they find out after that session that she is recording all of the sessions.
Ooh.
Oops. So, yeah, they just kind of start a fire to her beautiful cocoon of a home.
Which I think is illegal
created.
for the therapist to record a session, I think. I don't know, but...
Well, they signed something. She was like, remember you guys did the paperwork and signed it? So, I mean, they signed it, whatever it was.
They did.
I guess they didn't read the fine print.
And naturally, in true John and Jane fashion, they burned her house down to get rid of all the evidence.
Yep, took care of that. And it is funny that despite all of these disagreements and stuff, they seem to kind of come together and bond over those sorts of things still.
Over the chaos.
Yeah.
So, Kimberly, are you still loving the show?
I'm concerned about John and Jane. I don't like the arguing.
Yeah.
I was invested in them as a couple, and wanting them to succeed. I liked that fun aspect of the show, so it is hard watching in real time as a couple is falling apart in front of you.
In 4K, yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Carmen?
I'm on the fence. I mean, I think that the episodes are always really compelling, and I'm interested to see how things unfold. But I don't know. I'm not really vibing with it as much as I was before, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review. We're at TakeThisTV on TikTok and Instagram. Thanks for watching. Welcome to the club. And remember, it's dangerous to watch TV alone.